One of the greatest achievements in the life of Caliph Umar ibn Khattab, do you know what it was? It was the conquest of Egypt, the land of the pharaohs, which was one of the most powerful and richest regions in the world at that time. When the Muslims conquered Egypt, celebrations broke out across the entire Islamic caliphate. But right at that same time, far away from Egypt, Khalid ibn Walid, the sword of Allah and one of Islam's greatest generals, was taking his last breaths on his deathbed. Let's go back about 4 years before this. Caliph Umar had dismissed Khalid ibn Walid from his position in the Muslim army and ordered that he stay away from all governmental posts. After this, Khalid ibn Walid quietly returned to his home, leaving everything behind. But even this time he didn't waste. He knew his entire life had been spent in battle for Islam, and now, for the first time, he had the chance to put down the sword and study the Quran. But even this peaceful life was not free from sorrow. Not long after leaving the army, a severe illness struck, and almost all of Khalid's sons died in front of his eyes. In the final chapter of his life, he had to endure the pain of losing nearly all his grown sons. Only 3 survived, one of whom later became a martyr, fighting in Caliph Ali's army during the Battle of Siffin. As Khalid's death approached, people began coming from far and wide to see him one last time. One of his closest friends came to visit, and Khalid showed him the wounds all over his body. He asked him, "Do you see any place on my body where a sword or spear hasn't struck me?" His friend was shocked and replied, "Truly, your entire body is covered in wounds." Then Khalid said, "Don't you understand from these wounds how much I tried to become a martyr? I used to charge into thousands alone on my horse, but still no one could kill me. And today, I die on a bed like a sick camel, full of shame." Hearing this, his friend replied, "Don't you remember? When the Prophet Muhammad gave you the title Saifullah, the sword of Allah, from that moment it was clear no one could break Allah's sword in battle." These words finally brought some peace to Khalid's heart. He lay back on his bed, and soon after, the greatest general in Islamic history, the man who shattered the Roman and Persian empires, who conquered Damascus and Jerusalem, who led the Muslims to victory in Yamama and Yarmouk, passed away, leaving behind only a horse and a few swords. May peace be upon him. He died in Homs, Syria, where his grave remains to this day. The news of Khalid ibn Walid's death spread like wildfire across the Islamic world. When the news reached Medina, cries of mourning echoed from every street. Women wailed loudly for the death of this great general. Now here's the thing. Caliph Umar had earlier issued a law in Medina that no one was to mourn loudly for anyone who passed away. But when Khalid ibn Walid died, people completely forgot that rule. Women cried loudly in the streets. When Umar heard these cries, he came out of his home angrily and asked, "Who has died that people are crying like this?" He was told, "It's for your general, the sword of Allah, Khalid ibn Walid." Umar stood there silently. After a long pause, for the first time, he allowed the people to break his rule, saying, "If someone is crying for Khalid today, let them cry." It's even said that Caliph Umar himself cried. What he didn't know was that before his death, Khalid had ordered that everything he owned be handed over to Umar to be distributed fairly. But when his possessions were counted, everyone was shocked to see that the greatest general in Islamic history owned nothing but a few swords and a single horse. Compare this to some of today's military leaders, gold-plated cars and private jets, and Khalid ibn Walid had almost nothing. Caliph Umar lived only 2 years after Khalid's death, but in those 2 years he could never forget him. He would frequently speak of Khalid in gatherings. Once the greatest poet of Arabia came to recite poetry before Umar. Umar ignored everything and made just one request: "Recite me some verses praising the bravery of my general Khalid ibn Walid." The poet rose in full spirit and delivered a powerful tribute. When he finished, Umar told him, "Even all your words together could not do justice to Khalid's bravery. Why is it that the entire world still remembers Khalid ibn al-Walid? Because he wasn't just any warrior, he was one of the 3 greatest generals in Islamic history." Khalid was born into one of Mecca's most powerful and wealthy families, Banu Makhzum. His father, Walid ibn al-Mughira, was the richest man in Arabia, so wealthy that the Quran mentions his wealth, saying, "Leave me alone with the one I created alone. I granted him vast wealth and sons always near him, and made life easy for him." Surah Al-Muddathir. To put it into perspective, the amount of money the entire city of Mecca collected to maintain the Kaaba, Walid ibn al-Mughira would give that amount alone. So Khalid grew up like a prince, rich, powerful, and with no need to work. But there was one task he pursued with passion, and that one thing made him the greatest general in history. His tribe's duty was to train wild horses for war. Every young man of Banu Makhzum was a skilled warrior, and Khalid understood horses better than anyone else. Later in life, every single one of Khalid's victories was won through his mastery of cavalry warfare, the power of horses he had known since childhood. In life, people repeatedly traveled to the cities of the Roman Empire and were always amazed by the grand cities and buildings, but they had no idea that one day the entire Roman Empire would tremble just at the name of Khalid bin Walid. At the time when Khalid bin Walid was living a relaxed life with his father's wealth, that was the exact moment when, in a small valley of Mecca, Allah chose his last prophet, peace be upon him, and from that moment a massive change began to take place in the world, because the prophet, peace be upon him, slowly started spreading Islam in Mecca. At first, it was the poorest people of Mecca who began turning towards Islam, but there was one person, the richest man in Mecca, who was also getting impressed by the prophet's words, Walid bin Mughira. He would frequently go to the prophet, peace be upon him, to listen to the Quran. But gradually, the rumor began spreading in Mecca that the richest man, Walid bin Mughira, was about to accept Islam. Due to fear of what people might say, Walid stepped back, even though he knew the truth of the Quran. And not only that, he became one of the biggest enemies of Islam. He spread the claim throughout Mecca that Muhammad, peace be upon him, was a magician. This act caused so much harm to the Muslims that Allah himself responded to Walid in the Quran. Then he turned away arrogantly and said, "This is nothing but ancient magic, the words of man. I will soon throw him into hell." Paraphrased meaning: not long after this verse, Walid bin Mughira died. But the oppression of Muslims in Mecca increased so much that it became unbearable. As a result, all Muslims were forced to migrate to Medina, where they began building the first Islamic state. At this time, Khalid bin Walid was out of Arabia for some work. When he returned to Mecca, he saw everything had changed. Every house in Mecca was filled with crying and wailing. When he asked what happened, his family told him that while he was away, a great battle occurred between Mecca and Medina, the Battle of Badr. In that battle, the Muslims had killed their leader Abu Jahl and 25 of Khalid's cousins. Most shocking for Khalid was the news that his elder brother, Walid bin Walid, had been captured by the Muslims. Furious, Khalid went straight to Abu Sufyan, and all the leaders of Mecca swore revenge against the Muslims. Khalid then set out towards Medina to free his brother. Upon arrival, he was surprised to see the Muslims had a strange system for prisoners. Based on the prisoners' strength, they demanded a ransom, 1,000, 2,000 dinars, etc. Those who had no money were released only if they taught 10 Muslim children to read and write. But Khalid found out that his brother, Walid bin Walid, had the highest ransom, 4,000 gold coins, worth millions today. While others were shocked by the price, Khalid paid it without hesitation and took his brother back toward Mecca. However, before reaching Mecca, they spent a night on the road. In the morning, Khalid woke to find his brother's bed empty and a letter left behind saying, "Khalid, I have accepted Islam and returned to Medina without telling you. I swear by Allah, I've never seen a man like Muhammad, peace be upon him. I didn't accept Islam earlier because I didn't want people to think I converted out of fear while in captivity. Now that I'm free, I accept Islam of my own will." Khalid was heartbroken, but his thirst for revenge still burned. So when Mecca gathered another army, Abu Sufyan made Khalid the general for the first time. A 3,000-strong army was sent to Medina to fight the Muslims. Meanwhile, 1,000 Muslims were already waiting near Mount Uhud. The odds were 3-1. Just before the battle began, 300 hypocrites deserted the Muslim army, leaving only 700. The Prophet, peace be upon him, placed 50 archers on the mountain, instructing, "Do not leave your position even if you see us winning, and do not move even if you see us losing, and our bodies being eaten by birds." The Battle of Uhud began. The Muslims initially pushed back the Meccan army. The Meccans, including Abu Sufyan, started retreating. But Khalid, observing the situation, stayed still, knowing the battle couldn't be won unless the archers left their posts. As the Muslims gained the upper hand, many of the archers came down from the mountain to collect the spoils. That's when Khalid struck, circling behind and attacking the Muslims from the rear. This sudden assault caused massive loss to the Muslims, and many great companions were martyred, including Hamza, R.A. Although both sides suffered, it became clear that Khalid bin Walid was a dangerous and brilliant general. Mecca celebrated him as a hero, but after avenging his family, Khalid felt he had no real reason to keep fighting the Muslims. He participated in the Battle of Khandak, Trench too, but the Muslims still won. Finally, a moment came that changed Khalid's heart. One day, while in Mecca, he heard the news that thousands of Muslims were heading toward Mecca for Umrah. In response, the Meccans sent Khalid to block them. But when he reached the expected location, there were only a few Muslims. Confused, Khalid asked and learned that the Prophet, peace be upon him, had used a brilliant strategy. He had taken the rest of the Muslims through the mountains and was now right outside Mecca's gates. For the first and only time in history, Khalid bin Walid was outsmarted. Deeply impressed, he began to admire the Prophet, peace be upon him, instead of opposing him, so much so that in front of all the Meccan leaders, Khalid said, "Say whatever you want, but there is no way a man like Muhammad can be a magician or a liar." This shocked everyone, especially since the first person to call the Prophet a magician had been Khalid's own father, Walid bin Mughira. And now, after his father's death, his son was undoing all that his father had said. He kept denying in front of everyone, but slowly Khalid bin Walid began to be drawn toward Islam. Meanwhile, his brother Walid kept sending letters from Medina, telling him about the greatness of the Islamic State. Eventually, one day in Medina, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, himself asked Khalid's brother, "Where is Khalid?" A wise man like Khalid bin Walid should have embraced Islam by now. Upon hearing this, Walid ran to send a letter to his brother and wrote, "Khalid, open your eyes now. I heard the Prophet, peace be upon him, praise you. Don't delay anymore. Accept Islam." After reading this letter, Khalid bin Walid started thinking, "I caused so much harm to the Muslims during the Battle of Uhud, and yet the Prophet, peace be upon him, is still forgiving me and inviting me to Islam." This thought deeply moved him, and he began preparing to go to Medina. When the leader of Mecca, Abu Sufyan, heard of this, he came to Khalid and asked, "Is it true that you're leaving us to go to Muhammad?" Of course, Khalid bin Walid was not afraid of anyone. He replied, "Yes, it's true." Abu Sufyan drew his sword in anger, but Khalid's powerful tribe, Banu Makhzum, protected him. And so Khalid openly left Mecca, declaring his intentions, and set out toward the Prophet, peace be upon him. On the way, he met Amr ibn al-As, who was also fed up with the people of Mecca and was heading to Medina to embrace Islam. Both of them accepted Islam after reaching Medina. However, even after accepting Islam, it was very hard for Khalid to accept the Quranic verses that declared his father, Walid bin Mughira, would be in hellfire. Troubled, Khalid went to a companion and asked him to recite those verses about his father. After listening, he said, "Recite them again," and then again and again. After repeatedly listening to the verses, Khalid's heart finally accepted them. From that day on, he stopped calling himself Khalid bin Walid and began calling himself Abu Sulaiman. Just a few days after Khalid embraced Islam, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, gathered an army of 3,000 soldiers to prepare for the first battle against the Roman Empire, known as the Battle of Mu'tah. Since Khalid was a new Muslim, he joined the army as an ordinary soldier. The Prophet, peace be upon him, appointed Zayd bin Haritha as the commander and gave instructions. If Zayd is martyred, Ja'far ibn Abi Talib will lead. If Ja'far is martyred, Abdullah ibn Rawaha will take command. If all three are martyred, then the Muslims should choose their own leader. When the Muslim army reached the battlefield, they saw the Romans had 200,000 soldiers. Some historians say it was 100,000 or even fewer, but everyone agrees the Roman army was far larger than the Muslim force. Seeing the massive army, some Muslims hesitated, but Abdullah ibn Rawaha said, "Either we will win or we will be martyred. Retreat is not an option." They chose to fight in a narrow valley between two mountains to prevent the Roman army from forming wide battle lines. The battle began with Zayd bin Haritha, who was like a son to the Prophet, peace be upon him, leading the army. He fought valiantly, but was martyred. Shortly after the battle started, far away in Medina, the Prophet, peace be upon him, gathered the Muslims and, with tears in his eyes, said, "Zayd has been martyred." Then Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, cousin of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and brother of Ali, R.A., picked up the flag and fought fiercely. When his right hand was cut off, he held the flag in his left. When that too was severed, he held it with his arms until he was martyred. The Prophet, peace be upon him, then announced from Medina, "Ja'far has also been martyred." Then Abdullah ibn Rawaha picked up the flag and was martyred as well. Now the Muslim army had no leader, and confusion spread. Suddenly, a companion picked up the flag and shouted, "Muslims, quickly choose a new leader, or our army will fall apart." In the middle of the battle, the Muslims looked around and saw someone fighting with great bravery, Khalid bin Walid. They were reminded of the Battle of Uhud, where all of Arabia had seen him as a great general. They rushed to Khalid and asked him to take command. He initially refused, saying, "I am not worthy to lead the Muslims." But the army insisted and placed the flag in his hands, declaring him the leader. Back in Medina, the Prophet, peace be upon him, told everyone, "After the three commanders, the Muslims have now chosen one of Allah's swords as their leader." From that moment, Khalid bin Walid earned the title Saifullah, the sword of Allah. Under his leadership, the Muslims launched a fierce counterattack, pushed back the Roman forces, and safely returned to Medina. From that day on, the Muslims set aside old enmities and fully accepted Khalid bin Walid as their general. After that, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, also appointed Khalid bin Walid as his main general and began sending him on major Islamic missions. When the Prophet, peace be upon him, finally conquered Mecca and entered with 10,000 Muslims, Even then, Khalid bin Walid was leading a large part of the Muslim army. Now, as Khalid bin Walid had become a major general of the Muslims, the most dangerous incident of his life occurred. One day, the Prophet, peace be upon him, sent Khalid bin Walid to a tribe to bring them under the rule of the state of Medina. When Khalid bin Walid reached the tribe, for some unknown reason, the people used a very strange sentence which is still difficult to understand today. On seeing Khalid and his army, the people started shouting something like, "We had left the religion, but now we have returned." Khalid bin Walid misunderstood their words and assumed they were announcing their apostasy, leaving Islam. He then gave the order for their execution, and many were killed. When the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, heard of this, he was deeply saddened. He prayed to Allah, saying, "O Allah, I have no connection with what Khalid has done." He immediately ordered that Khalid bin Walid be brought to him. When Khalid arrived, he explained the confusion, but Abdul Rahman bin Auf, who was standing behind, said, "You're lying. You only attacked that tribe to take revenge for your uncle's death," referring to an incident many years prior in which members of that tribe had killed Khalid's uncle. This made Khalid bin Walid angry, and a heated argument started between the two companions. The Prophet, peace be upon him, upon seeing his two companions arguing, did not remain neutral. Instead, he took Abdul Rahman bin Auf's side and told Khalid, "Do not speak ill of my companions. Even if someone spends gold equal to Mount Uhud in the path of Allah, it would not equal the worth of my companions." The point here is that while Khalid bin Walid himself was a companion, Sahabi, he accepted Islam later when Islam had already gained some strength. Abdul Rahman bin Auf, however, was among the first to embrace Islam, leaving everything behind in Mecca and facing enemies from all sides. From this statement of the Prophet, Khalid bin Walid understood that no matter what he achieved, his value would always be less than that of those companions who accepted Islam early on. After this, the Prophet, peace be upon him, called Hazrat Ali, R.A., and instructed him, "Go to that tribe, reconcile with them, and ensure justice is served for any harm done. Try your best to make sure no one remains upset with you." Through these actions, the Prophet, peace be upon him, corrected Khalid bin Walid's mistake, but did not remove him from the army. In fact, in the next battle, the Battle of Hunayn, he again appointed Khalid bin Walid as his general. In this battle, the Muslims set out with an army of 12,000 men. As they passed between two mountains, the enemy launched a surprise attack from both sides, firing a huge number of arrows. The Muslim army was completely scattered and began to retreat. In this moment of crisis, Khalid bin Walid learned from the Prophet, peace be upon him, what a true leader really is. While the entire army was in disarray, the enemy noticed that a few people were still standing firm. When they looked closely, they were shocked to see that the Prophet himself was still standing his ground. The enemy forces began charging directly toward the Prophet, peace be upon him. But instead of retreating, the Prophet advanced toward them, calling out loudly, "I am Muhammad, the son of Abdullah." Then he said, "I am the Prophet of Allah. I do not lie." Khalid bin Walid was indeed a great general, but in front of the Prophet, peace be upon him, he was still a learner. Until the very end of his life, the Prophet continued to keep Khalid as the general of the Muslim army. However, after the Prophet's death, many tribes in Arabia rebelled against Islam. Some falsely claimed prophethood. Others refused to pay zakat. At this point, Islam's first caliph, Abu Bakr, R.A., needed a military leader who could bring all of Arabia back under Islamic rule. So shortly after becoming caliph, Abu Bakr summoned Amr bin al-As, Khalid's close friend, and asked, "Tell me about Khalid. What kind of man is he?" Amr replied, Khalid is a master of war, a friend of death. He has the courage of a lion and the patience of a cat. Hearing this, Caliph Abu Bakr made Khalid bin Walid the first army chief of the Muslims and gave him the order to bring the entire Arabian Peninsula back under the fold of Islam.